Hey guys, this is video 2, Douglass's Authorial Control for Lesson 2 of Unit 1. Authorial Control in the Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, written by himself. Boy, that's a long title. Published in 1845. I want to share with you some information about the book that comes from literary criticism by Robert B. Stepto. He is an African-American scholar of literary theory and African-American narrative from Yale University, and he wrote a seminal book on the topic. So our objective is students will be able to situate the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass in the slave narrative genre. Let's listen to what Robert B. Stepto has to say about the book. First of all, this is an important work. It was published originally in 1979 that looks at how the narrative of Frederick Douglass is different than other slave narratives and how it sets precedents for all literature that follows, especially African-American literature. He argues in this text that the primary pre-generic or before the genre of African-American literature existed, because slave narratives were the first genre of African-American literature since slaves were not permitted to read and write. But that the primary pre-generic myth is the quest for freedom and literacy, and that it comes originally from the slave narrative. He also argues that Douglass's text is different than all other slave narratives because he has complete control as an author, and not all slave narratives did. And that he uses this control, or he shows this control at least, of his tale through several types of writing simultaneously at the same time. One is syncretic phrasing, another is introspective analysis, a third is internalized documentation, and a fourth is participant observation. So I want to talk to you about what these four types of writing are and why they're so important. Authorial control through syncretic phrasing. Syncretic phrasing is joining the past and present together in a single phrase or phrases. Here is an example from page 41 of the text. My feet have been so cracked with the frost that the pen with which I am writing might be laid in the gashes. So you can see the past is his feet cracked with frost. The present is right now, the pen I am using to write. And he's comparing the pen and the size of these cracks in his feet when he was a slave. And so using those two images becomes really symbolic, using feet that he used to actually escape, that he used to do the work that was tasked to him when he was not free. And then the pen that he now uses to create writing. They're important images, and they speak of his evolution from slavery to freedom, the physical work to the more mental labor of writing. He also uses acrid punning, acrid meaning just kind of bitter and angry, on the names of his oppressors. And this could be considered syncretic phrasing because he's joining the past, which is the name of the person, with what he's thinking about now from a distance. And one is Mr. Severe, and he says he was rightly named, he was a cruel man. And later he talks about a Mr. Freeland and how, although he was better than other oppressors, Douglass preferred to be on free land rather than to be working for this Mr. Freeland. Another way that Douglass uses authorial control is through introspective analysis. He's very famous for this. Introspective analysis is simply examining one's own thoughts, feelings, and motivations, thoughtfully reflective. And you can find this all over in the text. Here's a moment where he shows this introspective analysis. He says, "From that moment, I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. Whilst I was saddened by the thought of losing the aid of my kind mistress, I was gladdened by the invaluable instruction which, by the merest accident, I gained from my master." So he's thinking about a specific moment in time, and he was quite young when he realized this, that when the education was taken away from him, he no longer would be taught how to read or write. Now he was given the desire to become free, and that's what he focused on after that point. The story of Mr. Covey is a good example, too, of introspective analysis. This is a very famous line from the text that you should watch for. On page 75, "You have seen how a man was made a slave. You shall see how a slave was made a man." And we've got those repeated. All right. How about internalized documentation? This is factual documentations inside the narrative that order Douglass's personal history. What's interesting about this is that most slave narratives used these internalized documents to guarantee the writer's authenticity, to prove that, yes, this happened to me, I am this person, and these things are real. Douglass doesn't use these internalized documents for that reason. Instead, he uses it to show his personal history, his journey from a slave to a free person. And he uses, one example of this is using slave songs, which is a kind of document inside of the story. You can watch for that in the first reading. A forged pass that Douglass wrote for himself in his compatriots' works as internalized documentation. The reference to the Nantucket Convention of 1841 is another example of this. So watch for those as you read. There they are again. The last one is participant observation. This is the observer is also participating in the narrative, and he chooses what to reveal and what not to reveal, what to omit about his own story. He is a participant, observer, narrator. This shows his authorial control because he decides what he's going to tell us as readers. And Stepto makes this argument in his text. Part of the great effect of his tale depends on what Douglass does not tell, what he refuses to reenact in print. So watch for what Douglass chooses not to include, from some of the horrors of slavery to his plans of escape, and why. John Blassingame, who's written a lot about slave narratives, says that the more that the adventure, excitement, and perils of the escape seem to be the reason for the narrative, the less likely the narrative is true. So this is another good example that Douglass didn't care so much about doing what people wanted him to do at the time, the abolitionists, and to write a book the way that it would sell better. Instead, he was about capturing the truth. Watch for this in the appendix as well. Thanks, and happy working on your next lesson.